Hello and welcome everyone. Happy New Year. I'm really delighted to be hosting the first webinar of 2021. This is to start the year of celebration of Golden Jubilee of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. The college will be 50 years young this year. I am Dinesh Bhugra, past president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. And it is my great pleasure to be chairing this session. Just some housekeeping. If you are tweeting, please use hashtag RCPsych Live and tag at RCPsych. Also, there will be plenty of time for questions, so use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will be posting information in the chat box. The session is being recorded. It will be available on the college website. In addition, we're going to be showing you a video a bit later on. One of the reasons why this webinar is so important is to highlight the history of the college, but also history of psychiatry. 180 years ago, Royal Medico-Psychological Association was formed as a part of the Royal College of Physicians. And over 50 years ago, a campaign started to establish a Royal College of Psychiatrists. And what we're going to be hearing today is how the college came about, what the challenges were, and how we got where we are. It's absolutely crucial to remember history because we can learn from it. Otherwise, we keep making the same mistakes. I recall when I started doing psychiatry in 1983, I heard about the establishment of the college, and in interviews with various leaders of the time. Initially, I remember having a conversation with Anthony Clare, and then subsequently with David Goldberg and John Gunn, Peter Noble, and others, how the college came about and how the trainees were so opposed to it. And one of the big lessons for me was learning about the institutional memory to see how things develop. And you could not possibly imagine that David Goldberg or John Gunn or Peter Noble would be, and Angela Rouncefield would be rebels. But it is the lesson for us because we'd always thought that psychiatry is sufficiently similar to, but sufficiently different from medicine. And certainly when the college was set up, there was a very clear thinking that we did not want to go down the route of the Royal College of Physicians by having gowns and ceremonies and so on and so forth, because we were different for the same reason that psychiatrists won't wear white coats. And that in itself has changed in the last 5 or 10 years. We now have gowns in the college. New members have their gowns and the college officers have their gowns. But it is important to learn from what it was like 50 years ago. So it's a great privilege and an honor to introduce the speakers for this session. Our first speaker is going to be Angela Rouncefield. And in a way, the video was her idea. It kind of started off by her raising some issues within various committees in the college. She graduated from Liverpool. She started medicine working as a nursing orderly at the age of 14. and now runs a Blue Health charity and program in the West Country. She will be followed by Peter Noble. Peter retired as a consultant from the South London and Maudsley, one of the most generous, kind consultants I have ever known. His patients adored him. His trainees loved him. He will be followed by John Gunn. John is a forensic psychiatrist, a true pioneer in the field. He set up forensic psychiatry training. He set up master's training courses in forensic psychiatry. And he also published one of the first textbooks of forensic psychiatry and established a forensic psychiatry journal. And our last speaker is Sir David Goldberg, who trained at the Maudsley and then went as head of the department to Manchester and then came back to the Institute of Psychiatry as head of department, from where he retired a few years ago. Again, he's been a great friend and mentor, and it's a great pleasure to welcome all these giants of psychiatry who are going to sort of shine a light on how the college came into being. We're going to start by seeing a 6-minute video, and then each speaker in that order will say something, and subsequently we hope to have 20-25 minutes, perhaps even longer, for questions and answers. So Jess, over to the video, please. Some beginnings can be awkward. That was certainly the case when the Royal Medico-Psychological Association, or RMPA, wanted to evolve into the Royal College of Psychiatrists back in the 1960s. Not everyone agreed with the plans, and a band of rebel junior doctors strongly objected to the way it was being formed.
They were not willing to listen.
Who were pompous.
There was a sense of personal outrage.
We were basically shouted at.
I am Dinesh Bhugra, former president of the college and a psychiatrist who has always been fascinated by our history and our past. The doctors now in their 80s claim it wasn't a little disagreement that was easy to resolve. It lasted months and it got very heated.
They were arrogant. They were not willing to listen. It was very sad to see senior people lacking vision.
The old RMPA seniors who were pompous and stuck in their ways, and a good example of the sort of people I didn't think should be running the new college.
The rebels were known as the Petition Group, a small circle of mainly junior doctors who felt that entry to the new college should not be solely exam-based like some other royal colleges. It needed to standardize training for psychiatrists across the country first.
Their exam was a money-making venture that gave them very little responsibility for training. They failed 94% of the people who took the exam, but they took a full fee off everybody who failed.
There was a group that didn't want a Royal College, but those of us that did felt that it should be an instrument for changing postgraduate education, which was pretty lamentable across the country.
They couldn't see that outside of the major teaching hospitals, how bad things were and what needed to happen.
Archives show that the Petition Group took their concerns to the RMPA seniors in the form of a letter. John Gunn was one early signatory.
The council say it will upset the negotiations with the Privy Council. So we said, well, we want to meet them and we're going to publish it somewhere else if you won't publish it. And that infuriated the RMPA Council, and they demanded the presence of the signatories to the letter to meet them.
There's no doubt the petition had gathered support, and the establishment of the day started to worry. On 8th of June 1968, a core group was summoned to the headquarters.
They all sat along a table and they stood us against the wall with nowhere to sit. So we very politely said, would you mind if we went and got some chairs and sat down? So we went and got some chairs ourselves and we sat down, and there were these two people facing themselves. And we were harangued. It was not a pleasant experience.
After the June meeting, we were all threatened with expulsion if we didn't take our names off the letter.
By now, anger about the way the petition group had been treated was evident. David Goldberg says he was keen that it was known publicly.
I picked up the phone and fixed up for the Guardian to receive a letter from us. And it was that, I think, which really put the frighteners on the old RMPA.
A few weeks later came the AGM held in Plymouth, over 200 miles from London, a decision some felt was deliberate. But not to be put off, the petition group pursued by hiring a coach.
Hired this charabanc to take people from the Maudsley in London, where most people were, down to Plymouth.
We sent a telegram to the seniors, who were all staying in a very posh hotel, saying, battle lines have been drawn, see you in the morning. So when we arrived at the Guildhall in Plymouth, it was surrounded by police.
We went as a group to make waves. It was a public meeting, and everybody has to be on their best behaviour in a public meeting, and the police presence was surprising, but that's how the old men felt who ran the RMPA. It was undoubtedly a moment when we began to have some clout, and we had to be listened to.
After that, stronger efforts were made to stop press coverage, with the seniors writing persuasive letters to the junior doctors to keep them stum, with negative consequences for some.
I felt that my career in psychiatry in this country had been damaged. And I went and looked for jobs the other side of the Atlantic.
So how did it get resolved? Well, clearly not overnight. And it's thought that a new president who was prepared to listen to the voices of the young made a big difference.
Young people coming along will look at a situation and they will challenge it, and that's really healthy, because they may well come up with a much better way of doing something.
In my view, the greatest legacy we have from this group of rebels is that we remain a college which keeps listening and learning so we can stay forward thinking. Thanks very much. It just indicates how things change and how things don't remain the same. So I'm going to hand over to Angela for her thoughts and comments on how it got resolved, what happened, and what are the lessons for the next generation. Angela, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dinesh. That was the first time I've seen that, because we've had no Wi-Fi where I'm in Cornwall recently. So it was very interesting for me to see it. I think the two things that really strike me about it was that although at least three of us thought that we wouldn't get jobs in the future and looked abroad, overseas, I went to New York and got offered a job, which ultimately I didn't take up, because I was able to stay here, which was great, which is what I really wanted to do. But the thing I've always learned from this is that whenever I've had committees in the future and throughout my career, I've always thought we must have young people on these committees, because they come up with great ideas and they make us really look at what we're doing. I find that really great. And I've actually applied it to my clinical practice, because I think, well, we look at what psychiatrists did 100 years ago and we say, oh, how shocking. Well, in 100 years' time, people will be looking at what we're doing and they'll say, how shocking. So I think this sort of keeps us in line and stops us getting stultified. So I was very keen for us to make this video for that reason, so that we make sure our college stays vibrant and that we make sure all our young trainees can contribute. I don't know how much time we've got, Dinesh. What I would say is that eventually there was a vote taken, and I think it may have been the meeting at Plymouth, I'm not sure. Peter and David may remember that better than myself, but we did win the day, and how important it was not just to have an exam, but to lift the whole status of psychiatry throughout the country through a formalized training. And that still exists today. And it's what I'm pleased about is we keep renewing it, and that's very important to do that.
I think one of the main reasons why it was agreed that the college will not make profits out of exams. So any profits which are made are going to be invested back in exams or in training. So unlike the Royal College of Physicians, that was a very different process. Over to you, Peter.
And, put video on.
It should be coming on. We can hear you. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
We can see you now.
Can you see me now? No.
Now we can. You keep disappearing.
Okay, I think the video started. Look, thank you for asking me. Yeah. Yes, they were exciting times, which I remember well. And I suppose my first comment is, I'm struck by how old we all look, much, much older than the old bogeymen we were fighting in 1971. So times change. We're the old generation and they're dead. It was a curious conflict between the established RMPA and at the beginning, this young group of trainees, mostly associated with universities. But I think it reflected some fundamental things going on in British psychiatry. Psychiatry as an institution in this country was really a 19th century invention, the county asylums. And the psychiatry of the county asylum officers was provincial. There were none in London. It was not particularly associated with universities, and it was not associated with the teaching hospitals. It was a provincial profession, and the membership, that reflects its first name. It was the 1841, the Association of Medical Officers of Asylums and Hospitals for the Insane. And really that didn't change throughout the Victorian era. And it didn't change very much in the first 50 years of the 20th century. The names changed a bit, but not the substance. And real change didn't come in, I think, until post-1948, when the health service brought psychiatry within a single medical organization. And of course, it had only been 20 years for changes to take place between the health service and the foundation of the college in 1970. And the college was still dominated by its provincial worthies. They had, I think we can be harsh on them, but actually they had done a lot of good. They had a lot to be said for them. But they were just out of touch with teaching methods, with universities, and indeed with the teaching hospitals. And the people they ran up against us, as a group, we could not have existed 20 years earlier. There would not have been enough young people in teaching hospitals and university centres to fill a charabanc to Plymouth. There'd been virtually no one. So it came a change, a time of change. Psychiatry was becoming involved with universities. It was moving to the teaching hospitals. And the provincial worthies who'd been in charge for, well, 150 years, really, were beginning to be moved out. And in a way, there is a sort of sadness about it, that those who worked and brought about the college did not have much in the way of office and glory when the college came in. They were replaced. A bit like sort of Moses, I think it's Moses, but if I've got it wrong, correct me, who really did not himself enter the promised land. So they brought us to it, but they didn't quite get in it themselves. Their influence was replaced. And I think the universities and departments of psychiatry played a major part from then on, whereas they played really no part at all in the old RMPA. Anyway, that's what I think. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter. I mean, I think I agree with you that it also, the coming together of the college also reflects changes in the society and shift in care and availability and so on and so forth. And perhaps we can come back to that in discussion. So let me hand over to John.
Can you hear me?
Yes, John.
See me? Good.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. It certainly brings back memories. It's a long time ago in many ways. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about the film, if I may, at the beginning. You will have noticed during the filming that we were in front of two of the previous presidents. The first one was Jim Burley, and the reason that was it, he was brought into our film was because although he was a young consultant, he was one of the vigorous campaigning consultants, and he took our cause up with a vengeance when it all started. And I remember having long discussions with him, and he in fact organized for him and me to go and meet Sam Silkin, who was the counsel to the Privy Council. Sam Silkin was highly amused that the RMPA were opposed to our discussions and our ideas. He just said, actually, the Privy Council likes people to discuss these things so that they get it right. So Jim Burley was very instrumental in helping us. The second person, of course, that we were in front of in the film was Sir Martin Roth, who, much to the surprise of the RMPA, was elected as the first president. And he proved, and some people were worried about that because he was thought to be a bit of a conservative himself, but he proved to be very receptive to the notion that young doctors should be given a voice. And he set up a number of institutions which have still survived until this day. So those were two important people in the film. The other thing I'd like to do is to, I'm afraid, correct our chairman slightly. He said that the RMPA came from the Royal College of Physicians. It had nothing to do with it.
No, it was part of the Royal College of Physicians. That's what I meant.
No, it was never part of the Royal College of Physicians. It was always a separate medical superintendents organization, as Peter Noble has just explained. And it gradually collected among itself the old consultants who were running the mental hospitals up and down the country. And there were very few people, for example, in the Maudsley where I was training, who belonged to it. I was an enthusiastic member because I thought that the quarterly meetings they had, where there were discussions about psychiatry, were very useful. But the RMPA never had any idea of what which related to training, really. They were not interested in the training standards, and we're celebrating actually a big change within the administration of psychiatry, because I see that the logo at the front says this is the 180th anniversary of the RMPA. Well, it is. It's a funny date to celebrate 180s. But in fact, 50 years ago, when this row took place, there was a really fundamental shift. And I think we played a big part in that. And the shift was towards education. And the Royal College set up a training inspection scheme, which was extremely successful until one of the Labour Secretaries of State abolished it. And I think Dinesh will remember that, because I think he was very involved when PMET-B came into being, which was a bit of a disaster. And it was, in fact, given the training inspection was given to the General Medical Council, who really didn't know what to do with any of it. So that was a pity. But in fact, the initial stages were when we set up our own training inspection scheme, and that was extremely important. The other thing that we tried to do at the beginning, and unfortunately has lapsed a bit, but is to make the Royal College of Psychiatrists a research body. Medicine advances by research, and we needed to get into a mode of thinking that we should experiment and study and research. And the college was very active in that respect as well. So I think the interesting point is really that the old guard, as I think one of you has just explained, did not survive these sort of ructions. They, in fact, none of them were elected, as far as I can remember. I may be wrong about that, but I think none of them were elected to the new council of the Royal College. So it really was a very big shift in personnel and thinking. So I think it's the 50 years that we should be celebrating today, because without that change, things would be, I'm afraid, not quite the same.
Thanks very much, John. Yes, I was kind of alluding to the exam bit of the Royal College of Physicians, and you're absolutely right. RMPA was a separate organization evolving from something else. So let me hand over to Sir David Goldberg. David. You mute, David.
How about that? I was just saying that I've entered a terminal phase of my life where I'm dead, but I won't lie down. And it's I now communicate with those who want to listen to me by a weekly blog, and happy to send it to members of the college who are interested. What has been said is all true, and there's no doubt that although it's factually correct that the RMPA is extremely old, 140 years or so, the college is not. And the college is a totally different organization. And some of our colleagues who are not with us anymore, and ourselves who seem to be hanging on to life, did manage to put a completely different print on the college. And we spent our time trying to improve training and to improve the way in which people joined the college and what they were expected to know. So it's been an important time. And if I can just give you one little anecdote, one of the people that I had to work with after I became a professor myself was Ian Trutheran, who was the professor at Birmingham, who had been a member of the RMPA. And Ian Trutheran was very curious as to who had written the letter to the Guardian, and he lowered his voice so that nobody listened and said, did I know who it was? And I said, I was afraid I didn't. And so that was how that dragged on. But there was the curiosity as to who had written that letter pursued me for some years. And the older people who remembered the RMPA felt, you know, that we had shaken the sort of railings of the college, and they had to find it out, but they never did. And I was happy when it became clear to me that nobody gave a damn anymore as who had done it. But it was me getting impatient. I had a slightly difficult thing because I had won the Gaskell Gold Medal that year, and it had to be presented to me in Plymouth. And so I was feeling very nervous in case they decided to put it back in their pocket. But luckily that didn't happen. And so here we all are.
But I mean, at that time, David, I mean, how did you go about the letter to the Guardian? How did you sort of go about getting signatures for that, or the petition as a whole? Was it sort of handed over to specific training schemes, or the training schemes didn't exist in that sense, did they, at that time?
No, I come from a family with journalists in it, and my brother was a journalist on the Daily Mirror, and he facilitated me communicating with the Guardian, and grateful to him for many things, but that was certainly one of them. And the Guardian were delighted to have communication with us, so there was no difficulty. As soon as I was told who to phone and who to speak to, there was no problem from the Guardian. They were happy, and I was able to send them a letter from us, and it did the trick.
I mean, something has just popped up in the chat box, which sort of says that Ian Trutheran was also known as a rebel who was expelled from South Africa. Is that true?
Can I just interrupt for a second? Ian Trutheran was a BBC reporter and a journalist. The man that David met and talked to was my old boss, William Trutheran. He became Sir William Trutheran because of his work in Rhodesia. And it is true that the Rhodesian medical school, which was set up by the Birmingham Medical School, had to be closed down after Rhodesia obtained independence. And I don't know whether that's what's being referred to, but the man concerned was William Trutheran.
That's true, yeah.
He also did a textbook, didn't he?
He did a book on what he called unusual syndrome.
Psychiatric syndromes, yes.
Things like the Couvard syndrome and things like that that he wrote. He didn't ever write a textbook.
No, yeah, you're right. Okay, well, thank you all very much. We have 25 minutes for questions and answers and comments. I think, I mean, one of the things that has been coming up in the questions is about exams and whether, you know, exams make profit and what happens to the money. And certainly in my time as the Dean of the College, you know, whatever profits we made went back into the exams, but, you know, kind of, you have to keep moving. When I took my membership exams in 1984, 85, we had one essay question and multiple choice, and you had negative marking. And then that had to sort of change into various other ways. And then, you know, CASC came up with sort of actors and so on and so forth. So all those profits get used into piloting a new system. So it isn't that they just sort of sit somewhere. And that principle, as far as I know, is still adhered to by the college.
It is.
And I mean, you're one of the trustees, John.
Yeah, you're correct. That is still a principle. It was one of the things that we petitioned Sir Martin about as soon as he became the president, and he agreed immediately that the examination should be ring-fenced, and it should not be, as it was in the Royal College of Physicians, a means of funding the college in general. And that principle has still been held right the way through. And when we look at the accounts on the trustees, we look at the exam section as different from the rest of the college finance.
That's still, I mean, it is incredibly important for the people who are tuned in to hear that, because there is this kind of myth that the college exists for exams and making profits. And one of the main lessons for me listening to, you know, four of you was that why the youngsters and the rebels went into this petition and went into that line was precisely to stop behaving like the Royal College of Physicians.
That's right, absolutely.
And Angela, I mean, what was it like? I mean, there's also sort of, you know, a question which has come up is about whether the kind of anti-psychiatry movement of the late 50s, early 60s played a role in the establishment of the college, or did it help or hinder?
I think it helps some people and hinders others. I mean, quite a lot of us, you know, it just made us all the more determined that psychiatry shouldn't be the Cinderella and should come into the mainstream of medicine in a sense, and yet remain absolutely independent as well. For me, it certainly made me more determined, the anti-psychiatry movement, absolutely.
Right, and I mean, in that sense, I mean, David, it's for you that, and particularly sort of influence of Hardy, Lang and Co. I mean, did that shape any form of the college, or, you know, what particularly focused on training?
Well, we all had to read The Divided Self, which was one of Lang's textbooks, and I thought it was pretty turgid stuff myself, but we all dragged our way through it. And I don't think he was a great formative person, because so many of his beliefs were ill-conceived and wrong. And so I don't think he made a very positive contribution.
I mean, one of the questions which has come up, David, while I've got you, is how did the establishment of the college get seen by other colleges and by the establishment? Because psychiatry was always kind of stigmatized and out there.
Well, it's always been courteously received, and I've not had any problems myself with other colleges. I think it's a sort of, we're kept slightly at a distance, but I don't really think that that's what happened to me or the people that I knew. I think we were able to do what we wanted, and I was never, I mean, I'm a fellow of the College of Physicians, and I don't think they've ever obstructed me in any way.
Peter,
yes,
what are your thoughts about the sort of influence of anti-psychiatry movement and R.D. Lang?
Well, I knew R.D. Lang, and he used to send me patients. And he could be terrible, in a sense, out of touch and drunk, but actually, I felt he was a very shrewd and very warm person. I disagree with David on The Divided Self. I felt it was a very, very insightful book into the schizophrenic experience. I felt that what he said as his life went on got more crazy and more harmful. I don't think the ordinary training of psychiatrists was terribly influenced by all this. It was sort of, we were too square to be involved. I do remember when I was a new consultant, there was a group who took over the cinema at the bottom of Denmark Hill to make it into a healing centre. and people who were really very crazy would go there. But I thought they were always very nice to them. And they learned quite quickly that if they couldn't handle a situation, they brought them up to the emergency clinic. You know, the actual practical differences. People find they cannot really handle a serious psychosis, whatever their philosophic views, and they take them to an orthodox psychiatric venture. I had a patient, I recollect, who in a manic phase went down to Canterbury, where the English bishops were holding a convocation on divine healing. And she asked them to divinely heal her. The Anglican bishops responded by having a whip round and giving her the fare back to Denmark Hill. I say to those who don't know the area, the closest railway station to the Maudsley emergency clinic. And I remember trying to get people to look at Foucault and some of this literature when I was doing the Maudsley seminars for registrars. And it was only a minority who were interested. Psychiatry really grew up outside. This wasn't a formative influence on psychiatry. Somehow or other, I think it substantially passed it by. Though that engaging American, was it Larry Gostin? Very, again, someone I knew a little bit. He really wrote one of the versions of the Mental Health Act was really written by this American campaigner. I thought he was actually quite good. So it never bothered me. I have a live and let live approach to matters. I mean, I had one African patient. They wished to bring a witch doctor from Nigeria. And I said, well, of course, not a problem. And they brought over this immensely smart young man in a smart suit who gave, I think, the best second opinion I've ever heard. He spent some time with the patient, doing whatever witch doctors do. And he then explained to the, I'm sorry to digress, but it's a good story. He then explained to the relative and myself that the patient had two disorders. One was a spiritual disorder, which he had cured by removing demons. And the other was a Western disorder called schizophrenia. And the demons had stopped the schizophrenia recovery, but now they were taken out. If he took his medication, he'd get better. That's worth coming from Africa to give to your patient. Anyway, I've wandered off.
No, I mean, I think that's really helpful because it kind of shows particularly the evolution of cultural psychiatry. I mean, I just had a comment from John Strang.
Oh, yes.
John, John's comment is that as subspecialist areas within the college become more substantial currently or in the future, the issue will presumably arise as to whether they should remain within the college or should they, like adult children, leave home and develop their own identities. Any thoughts while I've got you, Peter, and then I'll ask John, Angela, and David.
Ask John on that one. He'll be better.
Okay.
Can John ask John?
Well, I don't wish to diverge from our historical discussions, really, but there are problems about subspecialties and the rest of psychiatry, which I know John Strang will share with me. It is very difficult to get them into the centre of activity. Just to take my own specialty, we at the moment spend a good deal of money, time and effort sending very ill, mentally ill people to prison and leaving them there to languish. And this is something that every psychiatrist should take up as a crusade, and they don't. And I don't think a special college of forensic psychiatry would necessarily put that right. But I have set up a charity to try and raise research funds specifically for our area of psychiatry, which gets very, very little attention from fund givers and in research terms. And if ever a specialty needed research, it's the one I've just left. So I would agree with perhaps what John is saying. While I'm talking, perhaps I could also issue an apology. I said that Bill Trutheran had never written a textbook, and someone has corrected me on the chat box. It's not quite. I understand why this happened. In fact, Anderson, who was his professor when Bill Trutheran worked in Manchester, wrote a textbook, and when Anderson died, Bill Trutheran decided to take it on. So he took on Anderson's textbook, and I'd forgotten that.
Thanks so much. David, what are your thoughts about where we've been and where we should be going?
Well, it's not correct that there have to be just single organizations, that people of like minds and like abilities meet one another. Child psychiatrists, for example, have been meeting as a group. They are tolerant of adolescent psychiatrists. Don't, I think, get many adult psychiatrists going to their meetings, but these are different kinds of meetings. And the College of Psychiatrists is, if you like, at a rather earlier stage of education than these special groups like John's group and the child psychiatrists and my goodness me, the psychotherapists and mental subnormality. These are all small subsets of psychiatrists, and they naturally tend to want to hear papers and research which is in the field that they happen to be in. But it's quite appropriate for the College of Psychiatrists to represent all of them, and it goes back to a much earlier stage of their education than the specialist bits of their work.
Thank you. Angela?
Well, I agree with the drift that David was going down, that we should keep all these groups within the body, because when I was training, we used to be trained in every domain in psychiatry. And I've always been very, very grateful for that I've got, a basic knowledge of every domain in psychiatry, because it enables you to have a holistic view of things and to know what you don't know, actually. And that's terribly important, to know what you don't know. So I would not want them to separate out at all.
Right, thank you. There's again, I mean, there have been questions which have been coming about the exams and the fees, and I have a comment from Wendy as the dean. I mean, she's when she was the dean, and her comments are, when I took over as dean, the exams had started to generate a surplus. This was stopped, and council and trustees agreed should not happen again. And I think, again, one of the things that has happened in the past is that the exam fees, exam charges don't go up. Now, there's a question from an anonymous attendee. How does college ensure that the voice of the new generation of psychiatrists is heard? Any advice from the old guard how to keep the top brass in touch with the new thinking? And Angela, you sort of already made it quite clear that it's kind of quite useful to listen to the youngsters and the younger generation, because in the end, it's their future. And, we are kind of, way behind. I mean, is there anything further that you would wish to add?
Well, I wish we had a much better structure than we have at present of having junior representation right at the center of things. I think it's very important to have that. Otherwise, I think, we'll just be old fogies, like the very people that we criticized years ago. I think it's very important to do that and to ask them their opinions. That the committee that we have that's been looking at how we can celebrate the college, it's been lovely to have young trainees. And one of the other things that I've experienced at the college is when they've had witness seminars, I've found myself paired, you know, with a first-year trainee in psychiatry, and it's a lovely experience, you know, listening to them and getting them to challenge how we think and what they think should happen, because I think that's how you make progress.
And one of the questions that has come up, and I do apologize that I'm not going to be able to take all the questions, and you know, questions are flooding in. But it's an interesting question as to, you know, at the initial establishment of the college, was there a collegiate trainees committee, and were any of you involved in that? Angela?
No, I wasn't involved in the trainees committee, sadly.
Was there a committee then?
No, there wasn't. Not right at the very start, there wasn't.
Okay, so...
There was, though. A few years had to pass, and
right.
There was certainly a trainees committee. And
yeah.
I'm surprised to hear you imply that it's not got any existence now.
No. It is still in existence, yeah. David. But what Angela was saying is that it did not exist when the college was established.
No, that's right.
So do you remember when it came about, when it was set up?
And I can't tell you which year it was, but it was a few years in that was set up. Tony Clare was very active in it, and similar people in Manchester had their own organisation of young psychiatrists in training, which we gave great encouragement to, and I thought they were very good. I do want to disagree with one thing Angela said. She thought that we were going to become like the old fossils that we replaced. I don't think there's any chance of that at all.
Because if nothing else, psychiatrists should have insight.
Indeed. And I think that there are all sorts of things that we can do, which is bad and backward looking, but by and large, I don't think it's happened much. I think that we've preserved our critical approach to the subject.
Thanks, David. Angela, there are a couple of questions for you again. I mean, one is about the presence of women in the early days of the college. And also, how was it getting your voice heard as a woman in a historically male-dominated profession?
I think I personally was very fortunate in having senior people supervising me that did listen. So I think I personally was very fortunate, but I have colleagues who didn't have that happy experience when we were juniors and felt very marginalized indeed. So I think it's something that's, you know, grown throughout medicine, and I think psychiatry has contributed towards that growing in medicine, because we do have a lot of women in psychiatry. And so I think we've played a very important part in throughout the whole of medicine in changing that. But yes, I think historically it has been difficult for women. It's gradually improved. And now, of course, women are going to dominate, because we're going to have more women doctors than men shortly, I think. So we will be having to, the whole thing will reverse, I imagine.
I mean, I think one of the things that's, you know, the kind of stream of things which is running through the questions, and I think we've got sort of a minute each to respond to, which is about where next and what the international role of the college would be. Angela, we'll start with you.
Where the college should be going next?
Yeah. What next for the college?
That's a big question.
Maybe we should have a separate webinar on that.
I think so, because I think the question we should be asking is, you know, what is happening to our NHS? And we're part of the NHS. And I think we're very aware that, you know, we're at the whim of political whim, and suddenly and things will be decimated and people can't practice as they would like to. So I think it's a very big question, and I'd be up for us definitely having a separate webinar.
Okay, Peter.
One of the things that does worry me is the proliferation of psychiatric disorder, or at least the use of psychiatric diagnostic terms, the immense area of sexual identity and operations associated with that, the increase in eating disorders, the sort of increase in diagnosed depression in young people and suicide attempts in young people, that as well as all the issues which there were when we were young, none of which have gone away, there are a series of other disorders which are now numerically enormous, which then were unimportant.
Thanks, Peter. David?
Oh, I think that we mustn't make the mistake of thinking that old fogies like us should have any role whatever to play in where the college goes next. Younger people need to do that, and it would be a great mistake for people to start listening to people whose time has passed and are no longer there in the exciting position of deciding where we should develop in the future. I have quite strong views about where we should develop in the future, but they're not necessarily relevant, and it would reflect my own interest in how doctors get things wrong when either GPs or psychiatrists are taking a history. And this is because the new criteria for diagnosis seems to bring out the worst, both in psychiatrists and to a lesser extent in GPs, because by and large, they don't know the stuff on diagnosis that psychiatrists do. And it's really had a really deleterious effect on the subject, and it would be a great delight if they could step away from it.
Thank you. John?
Well, I've already said what I think is vital for the future, and that is that we become a much more research-oriented profession. Whether the college should initiate that or not is a moot point, but I do think that we are sometimes behindhand in thinking that what we should provide is services, and that of course we do, but we also need to provide research. And I think the other aspect which is beginning to come true, which is very good, is that we're beginning to become more political, because as Angela has said, and as we've talked about in this meeting, the NHS is a key factor in our work. It's not the only factor, but it's a key factor. And it's in the hands of people who don't understand psychiatry at all very often. And I think we really have to somehow make inroads into the political discussions, and we are beginning to do that. I think that the initiative to have a much bigger communications department in the college was a very good one, so that we can in fact lobby the politicians more.
Thanks very much. Thank you everyone for your comments, and thank you all for joining. And as I grow older, I become grumpier. And the reason why I was talking to a friend and why am I becoming grumpier, and his view was that when you grow older, you can see the bigger picture, but that you have very little power to do anything or change anything, which is why we need youngsters, because it's your future. And one of the questions was, what would our advice to the youngsters would be? And as I always teach medical students, firstly, never grow up. Secondly, always have fun. And thirdly, do psychiatry, because that's the best specialty you can ever choose in medicine. So it's been a great pleasure to chair this webinar, the first webinar of the Golden Jubilee of the College. Thank you all for joining, and look forward to seeing you at subsequent webinars. Thank you.